Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rachel Yoka. I'm the Vice President of Program Development at IPMI. I see that I know a great many of you, and a great many of you I do not know. So welcome. If you could please mute your line as you come in, and we will, of course, do the same if we get any feedback from your line in particular. Without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Brett Wood. Brett is not a stranger to most of you. He's co-chair of the Research and Innovation Task Force and runs Wood Consulting Services. Brett, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks everybody for joining us for this innovation session. As we talk about the roadmap to recovery, this is a project that the Research and Innovation Task Force, which I am a co-chair of with Robert Farron from the City of Columbus, we've been working on since the beginning of the pandemic, looking for opportunities to document the work that our industry.
I'm clearly doing my own thing. Don't
and if you don't mind, could you mute? That would be excellent.
I'm gonna figure out. Here we go. I'm gonna mute everybody, and then Brett, I may need to unmute you. All right. Are you good, Brett?
I am unmuted now. So
all right, very good. The joys of COVID, working from home, remote work. We've all been there. We all get it, and it is not a problem.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Thank you. All right, so let's jump right in because we've only got a few minutes. So as I mentioned, this is a project that we've been working on. It started in March 2020 with just a limited series of blogs that we did through the IPMI blog that also coordinated with ITE, Federal Highway Administration, Transportation for America, NACTO. We were sharing information about curbside management impacts from the pandemic, predominantly things like pickup and drop off for restaurants and how cities were implementing those types of solutions. From there, it grew, and we've been doing shop talks throughout the year with IPMI to talk about various facets of our industry and the municipal side, the aviation side, the university side, and what the impacts have been to those. We've documented a lot of those things in the magazine, in the format of blogs, in different reports. And those came out over the summer, and you can find most of those in the IPMI website. And Rachel's going to put a link to all of this in the chat if you're interested in finding these individual pieces. Over the summer, we talked with a lot of the leadership in our industry about what they wanted to see as we continue to push this project. Things like benchmarking surveys, how people were reacting and being impacted by the pandemic and the lockdowns and the reopenings that were associated with the different communities they were coming from. And we've been doing that over time. We did a benchmarking survey in the summer. We've done a benchmarking survey in the fall. We're doing one right now through the IPMI Trends Survey. So if you haven't taken that, it's critically important to get that information, not only for this project, but for all the projects we do through the committees. We did some articles about aviation impacts and what that industry was seeing from a impact, revenue, return to normalcy perspective. Also in the fall, we did a summary of impacts on academic campuses and talked to a number of campuses throughout the country, did a survey and benchmarked different strategies that they had tested, what was effective, and what they were doing for spring 2021. And then most recently, we just released this week, you can find it on the site that Rachel shared, a municipal recovery summary in the form of an infographic that looks at activity impacts throughout the past year and how those have changed based on community or different areas and geographies throughout the country. We looked at different things that cities have implemented, from curbside management, slow streets, data-driven practices, and how those have helped communities recover, not only from a parking perspective, but from a business perspective and an economic perspective. And then we had some really great videos with municipal parking leaders that are at the bottom of that you can watch, that talk about specific elements like operations and management, curbside management, and where that's going in the future. And then when does activity return to normal and what that actually looks like in different communities. And so that's out there now. You can see that. So we're going to go through a few of those elements, and we've got some interactive surveys we wanted to do with this group to get a sense of where you think recovery is and what it looks like. And then we'll talk about what's next at the end of the presentation. So first polling question, if you wouldn't mind bringing that up for me, Rachel. What does recovery look like? So when do you expect to see a normal return to operations and parking demand? And your options are, I'm seeing it now. I'm seeing continued decreases. I expect a return later in 2021. I don't expect a return to normal levels. So we'll give you a second, fill those in, and let's see where that is. Okay, we're starting to slow down a little bit. So I'm going to hit end on the polling. The results, you're showing the results. That's good. Everybody can see these. So majority of folks expect a return later in 2021, which is consistent with a lot of the data we've collected through the surveys. As vaccines and are implemented and communities reopen, seeing a return to normal levels. What's intriguing to me, though, the number 2 response is, I don't expect a return to normal levels. And that has to do with activity levels being different on the back end of the pandemic. And maybe we have a different normal than what we've seen pre-COVID. So we will close that down and go to the next slide and just share some of those results when we asked that question through the benchmarking. So this is from the summer 2020 survey. And you can see the majority of folks anticipated a return either in 2021 or they anticipated continued decreases. So the tan and lighter blue color show continued decreases from the pandemic, either in 2020 or going into 2021. We asked that question again of the academic institutions and did a comparison of just the academic responses. And you can see that there tended to be, again, some optimism that we would see return to pre-COVID levels in 2021, again, as more normalcy returned to campuses. And then this is the same question, but asked for the municipal respondents in the fall survey. And again, you can see a lot of folks expected that to come back in 2021, and they were starting to see those return to normal levels. We do have that survey open right now, the trend survey. As of right now, about 50% of the respondents expect a return to normal traffic and parking demand levels, but likely late 2021 or early 2022. I mean, again, that keeps moving as we kind of have the target of when the pandemic is going to end. There is, again, though, some concern that maybe there won't be a return to normal demand levels as we think of things like the working from home situation, whether that's in a hybrid fashion or a more long-term normalcy of most folks working from home rather than coming downtown. And if you listen to some of the videos that we had through the municipal survey data that we released this week, there is a thought process that perhaps our communities don't look the same. And instead of really tailoring our pricing and policy strategies to commuters, we have to begin to reorient some of those policies and practices to destination-based activity. Folks that are coming down to dine or coming down for nightlife or coming down for events, rather than setting up our policy practice permit strategies for large surges of commuters that come in 8 to 5 every day. So let's look at some of the academic responses that we had in the fall. So we'll start with the next survey question, if you don't mind initiating that for me, Rachel. So we asked those universities about COVID-related strategies that they implemented in fall 2020 and what they would look like in fall 2020 and then in spring 2021. So we asked people about flexible permit and payment options. So creating a hybrid permit that maybe wasn't a semester-based or an annual based, but something that's more day-to-day, month-to-month. We asked about implementing more visitor or daily parking to provide flexible and dynamic options. We asked people about shifting shuttle and transit services because of reduced demand and or social distancing needs on shuttle and transit services. And we also asked about reduced on-campus demand from either hybrid classes or work from home options for staff and faculty, and what does that do to the overall demand? So of those, and you can pick as many as you like, which of those do you think will continue not only in the spring 2021 semester, but for the longer term? We'll go a few more seconds on letting people vote. We're about half of folks have answered at this point, and then we'll see what the responses look like. Okay, you can go ahead and share those results. And so you can see that the biggest thing that people think will continue is reduced on-campus demand from hybrid classes and work from home, which is definitely something that's going to be implemented. It was a strategy that people were talking about from a TDM perspective pre-COVID, and now something that we've learned not only in the academic campus, but in municipal settings and other settings works well and allows us to mitigate some of the demand and congestion issues we may have by having all of our workforce come to campus. Flexible permanent payment options and daily parking are two other things that we see continuing as well. As people think about, if we have a hybrid workforce and a hybrid schedule for people coming to campus, we likely need to provide them hybrid options. So we'll stop sharing those results now, and we'll jump to the next slide, which looks at some of those actual answers from the academic survey that we did. And you can find these in the academic report on the IPMI website, which highlights a lot of the data points that came out of that from an academic impact and response perspective. But starting with those flexible permit options, about 53% of the respondents in our survey implemented flexible permits in some form or fashion. And what we found interesting was, of those that implemented, 90% of those anticipated keeping those for spring 2021 and beyond, just because of the flexible nature and the options that it provided for not only students, but faculty, staff. The second one, additional hourly visitor or pay-as-you-go options. There was only about 42% of the respondents that implemented this in fall 2020, but of those that implemented it, 100% intended to keep it. Largely, again, because it provided that dynamic and flexible option for users, but it also creates another revenue stream that allows those users, whether faculty, staff, students, to pay for parking that they only need for short term, even if they have a permit. And we're seeing a lot of universities moving in this direction. In fact, UC Davis is implementing daily parking as its only option moving forward, starting with this semester. We asked about the modified shuttle and transit services. 79% of the respondents implemented this, either a reduction in service because of demand levels, or creating different service structures to socially distance their students, faculty, and staff on the shuttles and buses that they have on campus. Only 60% of those that implemented it intended to maintain it for spring 2021. A lot were looking for opportunities to get back to regular patterns and service, just so they could support movement around the campus that didn't rely on self-driven vehicles. There's also a push to think about how transit may look on campuses in the future. Maybe it's no longer larger buses, but something that's a little more point-to-point and direct, or the use of micromobility options that don't cost as much to implement and maintain on campus, and provide more flexible options for your users. And then lastly, we asked those campuses about the hybrid classes or work from home. 89% of the respondents had that on campus. We found that most of the campuses were doing some hybrid level of classes where students did the predominant amount of their classwork virtually, but things like labs or graduate research were still occurring face-to-face. And so while the student may live on campus, they likely didn't interact in the class all that much. And 76% of the folks intend to maintain this, especially from a staff perspective, faculty and staff working a hybrid schedule, maybe only coming to campus 2 to 3 days a week, as opposed to coming all 5 days of the week. And there's a great YouTube video out from a Stanford professor of economics, he just posted this week, talking about that in the campus setting, that you should check out if you're interested in learning more about what work from home looks like on a campus setting. So we're still adapting and learning in the university world. And we intend to do this survey again mid-semester in a couple of months to evaluate how those universities are faring with another semester under their belts, and as they prepare for kind of the post-COVID environment in fall of 2021. And we invite all of you, even if you didn't participate in the first survey, to please participate in the next survey as well. And so some of the lessons we've learned from the academic side of things, there definitely is a really delicate balancing act between supporting the needs of the campus, social distancing, providing, reductions in enforcement or reductions in parking fees and hybrid options against sustainable operations, i.e. having enough resources to be able to provide the staff needed, provide the services and amenities needed like shuttles and transportation options that are typically funded by parking. We did find that flexibility and choice are key, providing options for students, faculty, and staff in the permits, in the daily pricing, in the parking options really helped to mitigate some of the demand issues and provide them opportunities to access campus in different ways. Those programs that were really outgoing and used marketing, social media, and different communication channels to converse with their student body and their faculty and staff were much more effective at moving people's behavior and implementing successful social distancing platforms. And then most of the programs are still using really data-driven practices to understand when they get back to normal or when to implement new options. And then finally, a lot of folks found that now was the time to try new strategies, new policies, things they had been trying to implement. Again, the UC Davis example of implementing daily parking. Stanford implemented 24-hour enforcement as a means of kind of protecting campus and keeping visitors off campus so that they were socially distant. And it was a good opportunity to implement things and try them out as campus was in a different population level. So let's jump to the municipal strategies. And again, we just released this and some really fresh data about how our municipal brethren are faring. So let's start with the first question. Which COVID-related strategies do you expect to remain in place in municipal parking programs? And so we asked things like curbside pickup and drop-off, creation of slow streets, which is traffic calming. You saw some examples of that in the previous session for curb management, where those communities have created more space for pedestrians and cyclists. Implementing flexible commute and permit payment options, doing some demand-driven operations, whether that's enforcement or payment options, and opening up streeteries, curbside dining. So Rachel, if you could initiate that survey and just pick whichever of those you think will be prevalent as municipal operations return to normal, will stick with us from an industry perspective. And we'll give that a few seconds. We're at about half of everybody. We'll give it a few more seconds to get everybody in. All right, that's probably good. We can share the results now. So the number one option that folks think is going to stay is curbside pickup and drop off for goods and food pickup. We implemented this as an industry relatively early to support restaurants who had to move to pick up, drop off, or pick up, takeout only. And we've heard from a lot of your municipal leaders that this is going to become a permanent function at the curb, even if it's just a short-term parking transaction, but really providing opportunities for people to interact much more quickly. This also will apply to the rise in use of things like Grubhub and Uber Eats and those types of delivery services that will be prevalent at the curb as well. The next highest option was streeteries, curbside dining. And again, yeah, we expect that to stay as we're looking for active space along the curb. And then demand-driven operations as well. That's something that wasn't necessarily new to pandemic response, something that our industry was doing quite well. But as we move back into a new normal, really using that demand-driven approach to make decisions and inform our community of how things are going. So we'll stop sharing those and we'll look at the actual results. So first up, curbside pickup and drop off. So 87% of the communities we surveyed as part of the municipal survey implemented curbside pickup and drop off in some form or fashion. And about 77% plan to maintain that practice at the curb, even in the long term. And it's one of those things as we think about curb management, which you probably get to hear this in several different presentations this week. Curb management is changing rapidly. It's less about the parked car anymore. And now it's active uses at the curb. And so we're going to see things like this become part of our policy and perhaps even part of our monetization strategy moving forward. Streeteries and curb cafes, 93% of the communities implemented this, 86% intend to maintain it, just providing nice active use at the curb and providing additional space for restaurants for socially distanced dining. We have slow and safe streets. So only about a third of the communities implemented some form of this, but all of those that implemented it intend to maintain it. And I think one of the best examples that I've heard down in Tucson, that program implemented pilot studies in neighborhoods, and it was so popular and effective with the residents that have expanded and made it permanent. And I want to say 18 neighborhoods throughout the community. And it's something that's going to continue to grow and evolve, where they're providing traffic calm streets that allow residents more space to interact in their neighborhood and reducing traffic volumes. And then finally, from a demand-driven operations perspective, about 2/3 of the communities we surveyed implemented demand-driven operations to understand when and how to adapt different curbside and parking strategies. And about 70% of those are going to maintain them. And that is demand-driven pricing, that's enforcement, staffing, allocation of spaces, allocation of permits, making sure that we do this based on the activity levels. And Seattle, SDOT, who's always been a great example of this with their performance-based pricing program, is using that program to re-implement pricing on the streets and implemented curb pricing at the lowest level that their performance-based pricing program allows, and is adjusting that on a quarterly basis going forward as demand returns to the community, which provides a really transparent way to show the community that you're trying to enable more demand without coming in and raising the prices to the highest level. So lessons learned in the municipal activity and demand are very slow to return. Even as communities reopened, demand did not come back just because the communities were reopening. And a lot of that has to do with folks working from home. And so we're trying to adapt now as an industry to what happens if a large portion of our commuter base continues to work from home. Curbside demands are changing rapidly, and they're here to stay. And things like passenger loading, commercial loading, active space are quickly taking the place of the parked vehicle as the primary demand at the curb. Again, demand-driven decisions provides transparency. And one of the things we heard in our interviews, in the videos and the new piece we just put out, was the pandemic really has increased the speed with which our programs make decisions and implement new programs. And we really don't want to lose that. We've shown that we can move quickly and adapt and iterate these types of programs, and we can do it with community support. And so we don't need to go back to the old method of really dragging everything out to get through the typical process. So some overall lessons learned so far in this process. Parking programs across the country, whether that's university or municipal, have adapted quickly and are really helping to support their communities, even with revenue losses, even with changing demands. Most of these programs are implementing strategies intended to help businesses return to normal or find some level of economic relief. Residents feel safe and socially distanced. Students return to campus while feeling safe and being able to access the amenities they need to implement or to access. We are probably a long way away from demand and activity returning to normal levels. I mean, at the best, at the end of this year, maybe into next year, but in reality, it may not return to normal levels. It may return to a new normal and a new type of demand pattern that we're going to have to adapt our programs to. And again, that's definitely going to be the revenue impact side of things. On average, programs are still down 40 to 50% of their revenue levels from previous years and activity levels from previous years. And we're going to have to adapt to the way that demand comes back into our communities and campuses. And implementing or testing new strategies, those things that have been on our wish list that we wanted to do are really pertinent right now, because they give us the opportunity to test these things in an environment where demand is down and iterate and implement them in a way that supports the community and builds consensus with our stakeholders in our communities and on campus. So we've got a few minutes. I'd love to hear from folks about how your recovery efforts are going, whether that's in the chat or if you want to unmute and tell us. I may be opening Pandora's box there if I do that, but I'd love to hear how things are going in your world, and then we'll wrap up with what's next.
So Brett, technology is grand. I got booted, so I lost the chat. There were some really great things in the chat along the way, but I don't know if you can access some of that. I know folks had commented on things coming back to normal and streeteries and all those multiple uses of the curb. And I see some familiar faces who I know have good stories. So we can wait a few moments and see who'd like to share and start us off.
Yeah, so I see a couple in here. That's good. I haven't seen the chat, so thanks for mentioning that. Mm-hmm. So Donovan from Tucson said, getting back to about 80%, 90% of normal by the end of 2021. I think that's kind of the consensus. I mean, there's definitely not going to be, full return. Josh Cantor said 75, but that's probably a high estimate. Mm-hmm. See here. Anthony Rock says teleworking of some faculty staff becoming permanent and commuter students going to continue to take mostly remote classes means we won't ever get back to pre-COVID levels. And that's true. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing about academic campuses is, you control your environment. And even if your students are remote for some level of their classes, if they're living on campus or accessing campus, there are ways for us to try to bring them back and create revenue sources through those flexible permit and daily parking options. Jennifer Casper says COVID has made Grand Rapids realize, I lost that, we have become too dependent on special events and need to reimagine our downtown draw. And I think that's true. I think we're all going to be thinking about what our downtown looks like. Do we still have commute workforce? Do we still have people living near our downtowns? And what does the overall draw look like? And I think we also have to think about that from a parking perspective as well. For so long we've relied on parking revenue as the predominant source of our funding, whether that's transient, permit, or citation revenue. Thinking about diversifying our revenue streams moving forward and finding other ways to monetize things that are happening, commercial loading, passenger loading, things that are happening at the curb, mobility hubs, goods movement, those types of things. If we can do that, if something like this ever happens again, God forbid, at least we've got a more diverse revenue stream that doesn't fall apart.
It's Brett and I spend an insane amount of time talking about this issue in particular, the curb and what's happening. And what we've seen is some tremendous innovation. But we've also seen that paired, especially on the municipal side, with not an equivalent revenue, a way to close the gap, right? So parklets are wonderful. How do you charge for that? How do you monetize that? Streeteries, deliveries, TNCs, commercial loading. You know what I mean? What we're not seeing almost is like that catch up, that formulaic approach to pricing the curb, meaning you're renting a very small piece of real estate for a very short period of time, not even 1 hour anymore with a meter, but a TNC or a truck or a FedEx, you know what I mean? So I don't know if anybody's made any progress on that sort of monetization front, because the recovery really hinges on it, especially if we're looking at the continuation of some of these services and programs.
Great points, Rachel. So we are, and I appreciate everybody's input, and I appreciate everybody's joining us today. We are about at time. I will wrap up with just the next steps. So as long as the industry's being impacted, we're going to continue to document what those impacts are. And more importantly, we really want to document all the good work that you all are doing in your communities and on your campuses related to serving students, serving faculty staff, serving business, serving residents to help our communities come back. I mentioned we're doing a spring 2021 academic update. So if you're in the academic world, look for that survey request sometime in April as we see what the spring semester looks like and we begin to prepare for the fall semester. We're doing that benchmarking round 2 right now. If you haven't taken the trend survey, please do. It's got a set of questions related to this. It's got a set of questions related to curb management. It's also got trends questions that we use within our committee and with other committees to think about where we spend our time to create content for the industry. And then finally, we're going to do more specific strategy discussions and video blogs with this group. So if you're interested in telling your story, let Rachel or I know, and we'd love to get you on the phone with some of your peers and record you to help the industry continue to recover and continue to grow.
Thank you so much, Brett, for leading us through the discussion. I did send you a bunch of links in that chat. If you need anything, absolutely let us know, especially that survey link. We're going into 2-track sessions essentially now. One for the hybrid workplace and one for citizen to hero, the power of data. So I encourage you to stretch your legs or walk around for a second and check out one of those 2 sessions as we continue with the summit. Thank you so much.